I mean, the other big thing that's happening is, there's been a lot of talk over the last few years about technology and the impact that's going to have on hiring. I'm a big believer in hiring for talent and potential, and sometimes you have to think outside of the box. I mean, I've done that in a couple of hires on my own team, and some of the best people I've ever hired deferring to the business. It's about listening to them, but really having our own voice and sometimes pushing back on them and basically giving them a solution that solves their problem.
We're here with David Moore, VP of Talent Acquisition at Box. Most of you will know Box. Most of you have probably used Box, a cloud management, content management solution empowering more than 87,000 businesses globally. David has been in talent acquisition and recruitment for over 25 years with companies like Microsoft and Apple and Google. So I'm honored to have his perspective on today. David, thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Lisa.
Could you start by telling us more about Box, your role, and some of the previous experiences that led you to the role?
Yeah, sure. Well, as you just sort of said, Box is a cloud content management company, which is a mouthful, quite hard to say very quickly. But yeah, we're a native cloud SaaS company. We've been around about sort of 15, 16 years at this point. We're a public company. We went public in 2015. And we produce a software that allows companies and enterprises to store, share, and use their content all within a very sort of secure platform. I think a lot of people who might have learned about Box over the years sees us as just a storage company, but we've been working very hard to add additional sort of features and value-added services to our platform. So, if you'll allow me a quick plug, we recently rolled out an e-signature product, Box Sign, which we're very excited about, and we're just in the process of also rolling out a virtual whiteboarding tool that will all work natively within Box, and that's going to come out later this year. So, yeah, lots of cool things going on in the company. We're about 2,500 people, and yeah, it's been a really fun experience for me working here. In terms of my background and journey, I've been in recruiting my whole career, very much a one-trick pony, but spent the first early years of my career on the agency side in the UK, which is where I'm from originally. And then I moved over to Asia Pacific, spent 10 years in that region, which was an awesome experience. I just learned a ton, and it was a lot of fun working in such a different and very dynamic part of the world. And it was while I was there that I moved across into more of an internal corporate recruiting role. And yeah, I've been sort of, I've been very fortunate and was able to work for some of the biggest and greatest tech companies that there are, Microsoft, and then Apple, and then Google. So yeah, Apple was the company that allowed me to relocate from Asia over to California, which I did sort of 11, 12 years ago now. And but yeah, I joined Box because I guess having worked for those huge sort of tech behemoths, I'd always been, I'd been in leadership roles, but you're still always going to be a cog in a big machine. And, Box were looking for somebody to lead the talent function end to end. And that was going to be my first time doing that. So I was really excited to take on that challenge. And it's been a blast. I've loved every minute.
And congratulations. I think you guys made it already to the list of best places to work on Glassdoor, and it's only a couple weeks into 2023, so very exciting.
Yeah, well, and we made number 2. We were kind of shocked. We were like, "Wow, that's how did we do that? That's amazing." But yeah, no, it's cool because I mean, there's a lot of great companies out there that we compete for talent with, and that I've worked for, and whether they're huge, great companies or exciting startups, there's a lot of competition in the market. But I think Box has a really wonderful culture, which is why I've been here for over 4 years now, and I'm certainly not looking to go anywhere else in the near term. And so it's really nice to see that recognized in some of these awards. So it's pretty cool. We're happy about it.
Now, David, your career in talent acquisition has obviously spanned multiple different transitions in the hiring landscape. And as you mentioned, you've been quite the world traveler with your career spanning UK and Hong Kong, Singapore, the US. So I'd love for you to share, what are some predominant views of talent acquisition that have been held until now that you think need to change? And Walk us through where some of those major mindset shifts need to happen for companies to be able to survive hiring.
Wow, that's a good question. Well, I mean, I think the good news is there's been a huge amount of change that I've sort of seen over the years in terms of how companies think about hiring, how hiring managers think about candidates. And well, I mean, I can mainly speak to the tech industry because that's the kind of the world that I've inhabited for a long time. But I think it's changed dramatically, right? That it's shifted from very much a sort of, oh, we want to bring in candidates that we know or that we've heard about through word of mouth, or we're going to be biased towards candidates that have a certain company or university on their resume. And I think generally speaking, companies are now taking a much more kind of expansive and inclusive approach to hiring, which is really nice to see. Um, and I think during the pandemic, obviously, that was a sort of 2+ year experiment into, can you hire people without meeting them in person? Which honestly, when the pandemic started, I wasn't sure was going to be the case, and it was kind of surprising and delightful to me that hiring continued and people were willing to take the risk of changing jobs, and companies were able to assess talent really effectively. So there's been so much that's happened recently. I think, for us, the pandemic was an opportunity to really try and figure out how we could access talent, in many new locations. And so, yeah, I think we're sort of living through this really dynamic period of change. But now we're sort of on the other side of that, and actually, the economic situation recently has been challenging, and actually lots of talent acquisition teams have been negatively impacted, right? So yeah, I mean, I think TA teams we're often guilty of ramping super aggressively to make sure that, because we're in the service business, right? We're there to support the needs of the companies that we work for. And so I think we're always desperately trying to add enough resources to make sure that we can do that, and we can, get every single hire locked in. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've been reflecting on this a lot recently. I think TA teams are going to have to be a bit more thoughtful about how they, and maybe manage expectations with their internal stakeholders differently, so that we don't just get into these situations where the market turns and all of a sudden hiring volume drops significantly, and we end up over resourced and having to make some painful choices. So yeah, I think that's one thing that needs to change. The other thing is that in tech, for the last 20 years, tech companies have used their physical office space as one of the primary ways in which they attract talent. I think Google was one of the first companies to really do this, and everybody else jumped on the bandwagon and tried to create these incredible office spaces with all kinds of cool perks. And the goal was to try and use that to attract people and to keep people in the office working hard. And now that so many more people are being hired remotely, and candidates are like, I don't want to come into an office 5 days a week. I'll come in, 1 or 2 days a week, but they don't see themselves spending 40, 50, 60 hours a week in that physical location. And so I think talent acquisition teams, to continue to be successful, are going to have to radically rethink what their employment value proposition. Like, what are they offering to candidates? And for candidates that maybe are going to be hired remotely in a different state from the headquarters and aren't going to be able to access those cool buildings, what's in it for them? And why should candidates want to come work for them?
As you kind of touched on a little bit too, we're still in a time where there's a lot of knowns for what's coming down the pike for the labor market. Companies are doing the best they can to try to anticipate what this year may bring. How is your team at Box adapting the talent acquisition strategy this year, and what are some of the successes and challenges in that?
Well, I mean, I think on the point I just made about, rethinking your value proposition to candidates, we're starting, as a company, we've been expanding quite a lot in the last couple of years. And we've been expanding into new locations internationally. So we grew a big R&D site in Warsaw in Poland, and so that was a big adventure, just trying to figure out how to hire talent there and think about how candidates, how to engage candidates that maybe weren't as familiar with Box as a company and as a potential employer than they are in California. But that's the same in the US as well. I mean, we have a very strong brand in the Bay Area, in Silicon Valley. We're well known. But if we're targeting and trying to engage candidates in Atlanta or Philadelphia, we're much less well known. And so I think we're spending a lot of time thinking about that, thinking about how we tailor some of our outreach to candidates, and how we tell our story to candidates in places where we're less well known. And I mean, I think as well, I mean, the other big thing that's happening is, there's been a lot of talk over the last few years about technology and the impact that's going to have on hiring. I have to admit, maybe it's because I've been doing this for a long time, and I was a little cynical about the promise of some of these tools, because they promised a lot and yet hadn't necessarily taken away the need to have recruiters or sources and coordinators sort of driving the process. But I think there are now signs. I've, like many other people, I've been studying ChatGPT in the last couple of months, and it does seem like an incredible product, really quite transformative. And so I think, yeah, we're starting to talk as a team about what are the kinds of use cases where we might want to use AI, whilst at the same time, so I think the goal will be to drive as much automation and efficiency as you can, so that your recruiters don't need to spend time on low value administrative tasks, right? And that should free them up to focus, their time and energy on talking to candidates, consulting with internal stakeholders and hiring managers, and doing the kinds of things that really is more valuable to them. But again, yeah, all of this automation can't be at the expense of candidate experience. Otherwise, I've like many people, I've been on the receiving end of trying to call a call center and getting a bot and having a really crappy experience. So yeah, again, for us to continue to compete effectively in the market, experience is everything. And so we're certainly not planning to just roll out a bunch of AI technology and risk turning off all our candidates.
Now, I see that you guys are still hiring. You have multiple offices, as you mentioned, multiple cities and different countries. What are some of the most difficult roles you have found to fill, and why? And what is your advice for companies struggling to fill in these areas?
Um, hmm. Well, I mean, it's a hard question to answer because I mean, I think there are lots of roles that are really difficult to hire for very different reasons. So yeah, I mentioned Poland. We're very new in that market, so we've been working very hard to establish our brand. But when we first started calling candidates, we didn't really understand what candidates wanted in Poland, what was important to them, and they didn't know us. And so that was a real sort of that was a challenge just in terms of creating that awareness of who we are and what we had to offer. I mean, I think in tech, there are always going to be certain jobs, whether it be software engineering roles or account executive roles in sales, or more niche technical roles where there's a very high demand for a niche skill set that's rare, and every company's piling in trying to hire the same types of people. So cybersecurity type professionals would be another one that is a struggle right now. Um, so I mean, but I think the point is there are always certain roles in different teams that are hard to fill. Sometimes it can be junior mid-level roles that actually are more challenging to fill than executive roles. So I mean, I think the other part of your question was, like what advice would I have for other companies? I mean, I don't know, keep persevering. But I mean, no, but seriously, I think sometimes smaller companies worry about whether how are they going to compete against Google? How are they going to compete against, companies that seem to have a much more powerful brand than they do, or maybe they're paying more money, and a smaller startup just can't stretch their budget to compete. But I think you need to again think about the unique value proposition that you have, because not every candidate wants to go and work for one of the big beasts. And I think you also need to think carefully about what's a must-have and what are you willing to be flexible on. So hiring managers all start off with their wish list. They've got a wish list of 30 different things that they want to have, and I think as good recruiters are going to go back to them, having talked to candidates and having got a better understanding of what's available in the market at the price point you've set. And then maybe they have to have that tough conversation with the hiring manager and say, look, you want you're not going to find someone at this price point with those 30 things. So what are the 5 or 6 key things that you must have, and then what are maybe some of the skills and experiences that we can train on the job, and that we can that we don't need right out of the gate. So I'm a big believer in hiring for talent and potential, and sometimes you have to think outside of the box. I mean, I've done that in a couple of hires on my own team, and some of the best people I've ever hired didn't necessarily have resumes that looked like an automatic fit for the job, but you think about the core skills and the behaviors you need, and it's, and if a skill set is particularly scarce and it's really hard to find people that can fill it, you've got to think laterally, and you've got to think about the people with the transferable skills that you can help adapt into those roles, and hope that they're successful.
David, can you share with us some of your secrets for thriving as a TA leader and some of the key lessons you've learned along your journey?
Oh my God, there are lots. There are lots. I mean, I think working in an internal talent role, I think you've got to remember that it's all about the business. Um, and the more you can do to learn about what is the business trying to achieve, what are the business needs, and everything starts with that. And I think what a boss I had many years ago said, you've also got to make sure you run at the same pace as the business, right? That they're trying to move quickly, and they don't, I mean, there are times when you've got to set realistic expectations and tell them, we're not going to fill this role in 3 days flat. You need to be realistic and give me some time if you want to hire the best person. But you've got to show them a level of urgency, that you're willing to kind of, that you understand that this hire is critical to them maybe meeting a project goal or a revenue number, and that you're going to do everything you can to help them meet that objective. I mean, I think once you get into a leadership role, you've also got to remember and realize that it's all about your team. They're the ones that are actually driving the work for you. Frankly, they're the ones that make you look good, and so I think you've really got to show them that you care, and that you're willing to kind of go to bat for them and support them and advocate for them. And I think it helps if you've walked a mile in their shoes, and you've done the job that they're now doing. I think it's really important that you show them a level of empathy, that their job's hard, and yeah, that that you're going to do everything you can to help them be successful. So, um, yeah, I mean, the other thing is, it's a hard job. So I think, I used to have a couple of friends that I worked with in the UK many, many years ago, and we used to talk about, it's all about being the last one standing, right? Recruiting is all about resilience and staying power. Um, and there are going to be times when it's going great and everyone thinks you're amazing, but you're actually not. Maybe you got lucky with a couple of candidates and you're not really a genius. And then conversely, there'll be times when it's a real struggle, and it won't be through any fault of your own. It'll just be through circumstances that might have been out of your control. So yeah, try and stay level headed about it, and don't take yourself too seriously. So I think the final thing I'll say is, we talk a lot as a team about making sure that we're owning our expertise. I think, I said before that we're in the service business, and our job is to support and serve the customers internally that we're working with. But I think sometimes talent teams make the mistake of thinking that they have to just follow whatever the business wants them to do. But really, the reason why we talk a lot about the value of being a trusted advisor, to our teams internally, and the reason why we have our jobs and why we get paid to do what we do is because we're being paid as the subject matter experts in talent acquisition, and so we need to show up like that. And it's not about deferring to the business; it's about listening to them, but really having our own voice, and sometimes pushing back on them, and basically giving them a solution that solves their problem, as opposed to just asking them which direction they want us to head off in. So,
Last question for you, David. At Solvable, we're all about what drives purpose and meaning for people at work. So I'd love to know, what drives purpose and meaning for you at Box?
well, I mean, I guess this will feel maybe a little slightly corny answer, but I mean, the reason why I've stayed in recruiting my whole career is because it's, I just love having great experiences, with people, and working with great people, being part of great teams. Um, I, recruiting talent's in demand, and so it's easy to kind of move from company to company, and sometimes that's a good strategy if you want to get a variety of different experiences in your career. But I've been on the journey now with my team at Box for 4 years, and we've definitely had to plow through some tough times as well as some good times, and so that is, the fact that we came out the other side of that is all the more meaningful for me. And I mean, actually, just as we turned, we got into the new year, I got a text message from a fairly senior executive at one of my former companies who just said that he'd been thinking about me, and just wanted to thank me for the for the fact that I brought him into this company and that he'd done incredibly well. And that was awesome. That was incredible. That there's nothing better than that, right? To feel like you've played a small role in changing the trajectory of someone's career, and they do the hard work, they do the job, and they get the accolades, rightly so. But you're there trying to facilitate something, and yeah, it's pretty cool when you get that. You get people coming back to you years later thanking you for the small part you played in their success.
David, thank you so much for being on with us today. And thank you all for listening to Architects of Contemporary Hiring.